So I met Sharon a while ago. You know, she's a great historian. She has all the knowledge of what's happened in the city of Vallejo. You know, we've had the Navy here from the Civil War through the Civil Rights and beyond. And you think about the history that must have happened. And there's so many stories to tell, and nobody really knows about them. But Sharon has been holding those stories and talking about them and writing about them for years. And I saw her talk about the Port Chicago 50 a couple of years ago at the library. And I never had heard about this. And so I saw her at the Starbucks in January, and we both agreed that there needs to be something done to dedicate what those gentlemen went through. And you know, my dad, he signed up for World War II. When he turned 18, he wanted to be a patriot, and so did the gentlemen that we're honoring today, and the way that they were treated, and the way that they stood up and said, we're not going to allow this to happen. And so we had the Port Chicago explosion. You know, that day it blew out windows all the way to Richmond. But the repercussions is blowing out windows for weeks and months and years, and that all happened here, and no one knows it. What those men went through changed the course of history. And Sharon has been telling that story. We're finally acknowledging it today. So I want to thank you all for coming. And before I get teary-eyed, and we have a council member, Rosanna Berger, Liga, who's joined us. Thank you so much. So without further ado, I want to introduce our Congressman Mike Thompson. And I want to thank Congressman Thompson for all the work he's been doing for our city. You know, we're having the Mare Island Cemetery is being repaired right now, and that's through his advocacy, so we're really honored to have him here. And I'm always a little bit starstruck when we have our congressman here, so thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much. Don't be starstruck. I'm pretty much a regular guy. Hold it up.
Need it closer.
So thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you everyone who had a hand in this for making today a reality. Sharon, I want to thank you especially and point out that this was my Woman of the Year in 2018. Today is a pretty important day. Not only are we honoring folks who lost their lives when that terrible explosion took place, not only are we honoring those whose lives were changed forever on that terrible day, but as they say, if we don't know our past, we're condemned to repeat it. And the fact that you mentioned that you didn't know about this, and a lot of people didn't, and this was a very dark part of our past that everybody needs to know about, so we never repeat it again. This was a terribly racist and discriminatory time, and we saw the fallout from that. We read it in the history books now. So it's important that we rectify it. And this is one step in that regard. My colleague Mark DeSallier, who represents Port Chicago, has legislation to exonerate the 50. And I'm proud to say that I'm a co-author of that piece of legislation, and it's long overdue. And this is something that should have taken place years and years ago. But it shows, I think, today's event and Mark's resolution. It shows that we've come a long way. We've come a real long way. But sadly, we still have a long way to go. And I was just thinking about on the way down here some of the positive steps that have happened since this tragic time. Well, we've certainly desegregated our military. In 1964, we passed the Civil Rights Act. In 1965, we passed the Voting Rights Act. We elected the first black president of the United States of America. And I wish he was back. And that's all good, and we've got to keep going. And there's a lot more that we have to do, and again, this is a step in that direction. And I think we as a people, we as a country, would be well served if we looked here on our great city of Vallejo as a role model. You know, we're one of the most diverse cities in the United States of America. and we've accomplished some great things. We have an American Filipino as mayor, who succeeded the first African American mayor of the town of Vallejo. We have the first Latina heading our Chamber of Commerce, with a board that's made up, half of the board made up of people of color. Vallejo just hired an African American police chief, the first in our history. And our NAACP chapter is the second oldest in the United States of America, established in 1918. So all this in today's ceremony shows that we've come a long way, but it reminds us that we still have miles to go. So the fact that we have this great turnout today and this incredible coming together of a community to make sure this happens is certainly heartwarming to me. It should be heartening for all of us. So thank you for allowing me to participate. I have a couple of congressional certificates that I'd like to present, if I could. And Sharon, one goes to you, because I hear that you still have a little bit of wall space. Thank you. Thanks for that.
Take a picture.
And one goes for the museum. And Katie, I'll give that to you.
Jim is here.
So thank you all very, very much.
And in my
Open it. Yeah.
okay, in my verklempt nature, I forgot the Pledge of Allegiance, and Colonel Nestor Liga has put up a flag, so we could all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And now I'd like to call up Tom Barty representing Senator Dodd and Assembly Member Grayson. And Tom Barty he was so helpful with this. We're really trying to get a permanent road sign out on Highway 29, and it was helped to do it today. But you know, there's Caltrans to deal with, so we're still gonna work on it. So anyway, Tom Barty, thank you.
All right, thank you, Katie. I do have to admit that working with the city is much easier than Caltrans, but we did make some progress, and thanks to the City Public Works for all the work they did. Standing here on this beautiful waterfront where, in my career with General Mills, I spent almost every day on this waterfront for 25 years. It means a lot to me. And this is an awesome monument, not just for an incredible historical moment in the history of the city of Vallejo, but it's just a beautiful spot. And also thanks again to the city for putting this together. We have also certificates of recognition today, one for Sharon and one for the Naval Historical Museum. And I'd like to just briefly read this. It goes as follows. We are pleased to join you in honor of your dedication to preserve the history of the long struggle to desegregate our nation's armed forces and to commemorate the preservation of the communities affected, especially the 50 courageous African American soldiers who survived the Port Chicago explosion of 1944. Your actions continue to bring justice to the fight against racial barriers, and on the behalf of the people of our district, congratulations, Assemblymember Tim Grayson and State Senator Bill Dodd. And we also have one for the museum. And it's very similar language, so I won't bore you by reading it, but congratulations.
Thank you, Tom. And next we have Supervisor Monica Brown, District 2. And Monica was also helpful in getting all this done with her new representative, Leah Meitzenheimer, who was on the team.
Yeah.
Thank you. So, the sun is shining. Think about who's looking down and saying thank you for the recognition. On the behalf of the Board of Supervisors, we recognize the 75th anniversary, but there's one part of the whereas that has true meaning for me. In 1946, the convicted sailors were given clemency, released from prison, and discharged under honorable conditions. Although, and here's the part that I'm hoping, Congressman, we can make sure gets changed. Without a standard honorable discharge, a status would negated their veterans' benefits. That, to me, is very crucial that we make sure that gets reinstated. What do we learn about history? Not only that we don't repeat it again, but when you come here and you read this resolution, and Leah pointed this out to me yesterday with the pictures, the 50 black rocks represents each person, and I'm somebody who would never have thought of that. So if we don't have monuments like this in 25, 30 years, when we won't, well, okay, maybe 40 or 50, when we're not here, our kids aren't going to know. And if we don't make changes, and so for me, I am honored to be here this morning. I love this monument, the bench. I can just see coming out here and having a sandwich and communing with everybody. But I too have two resolutions, one for each of our folks, so come on up. And when you get to the museum, then you can actually read all the whereases. Okay, let's get real, guys. I'm not reading it to you. So, on behalf of the Board of Supervisors, I'm honored to be here. Thank you, Katie, everybody who put this together. So we don't have feedback. Let me just hand this to you, and we'll do the picks.
All right.
Okay. Thank you.
To her house.
Right.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thanks, Katie.
Thank you, Monica. Thank you, Supervisor Brown. So I want to bring up next our Mayor, Vallejo, Bob Sampayan, who also helped get all this done. His office was instrumental in getting all these proclamations done. Angelique especially. Yes. She's fantastic. So I will stand with you if you want to read part of the proclamation.
Thank you very much, Katie. And I also want to thank our Public Works folks who are out here on a Saturday for getting all this put together for us. Thank you so much. Our flood and wastewater, thank you, Melissa, to your team for getting us the electricity for the microphone system. Thank you very, very much. This is really, well, before I even go there, we have a lot of veterans that are in our audience today. And as I look out at all of our veterans, I want to say thank you. You've done a lot. Thank you, sir. Thank you. You've made our country a safe place. You've brought peace at a time of non-diplomacy, I think is the best way of putting it. You've brought a feeling of unity for our country, so thank you so much for your service, but more importantly, thank you for your sacrifices to you and to your families. Because I know many of you that served overseas left your families to come out to to go to battle for our country. So I thank you so very much for that. Now, this is truly an honor to read a portion of this proclamation. When Katie brought it to me, we both went over it together, and it really means a lot in terms of the sacrifices that were made by the African Americans that were forced into moving this munition during World War II. And after the explosion of the ship, those died. And after that, it was called a mutiny when they refused to move any more munitions. I don't consider that a mutiny. I think they were more concerned about their safety and the safety of those around them. And that we celebrate. So in recognition of the 75th anniversary of the World War II work stoppage by the Port Chicago 50, whereas the Navy chose to limit opportunities for African American sailors in World War II, as the armed services had always done. Most could not work in kitchen. Most could only work in kitchens, dining areas, messmen and stewards, cleaning quarters or loading ships, stevedores. The Navy segregated sailors' living quarters by race. The Navy assigned the dangerous munitions loading operations to segregated African American units, which had been not trained in handling munitions. The Navy had failed to take the basic precautions, such as separating ignition sources and explosives, and
whereas the surviving African American sailors who helped extinguish the fires, rescue survivors, and collect body parts were sent to the Navy's segregated Ryder Street barracks in Vallejo, right over here. There, the Navy on August 9th, 1944, ordered them to load more munitions on Mare Island. 250 African American sailors disobeyed, saying they would follow any order except that involved loading munitions. The Navy confined the sailors for 3 days on a barge docked at Ryder Street Pier, which is right over there, and with the fog, I can almost imagine it there. Threatening them with punishments ranging from prison to a firing squad. Many returned to work, but 50 still refused to load munitions and were convicted on October 24, 1944, of mutiny and sentenced between 8 and 15 years of hard labor. And whereas the NAACP chapter, then the third largest chapter in California, was instrumental in bringing Thurgood Marshall, who became a Supreme Court justice, and NAACP investigators to Mare Island and the trial. Although denied the right to defend the sailors, Thurgood Marshall took his case to the media and the American people, arguing that the Navy had ignored warnings from waterfront unions that an explosion was inevitable and that the Navy should be on trial for its vicious policies towards African American sailors. In the eyes of In the eyes of the Port Chicago African American sailors who survived the explosions, their peers at Mare Island, the African Americans in Vallejo, and across the nation, it was clear that the Navy viewed the sailors who had been killed or injured as expendable laborers. And
now therefore be it proclaimed that I, Bob Sampine, Mayor of the City of Vallejo, the Vallejo City Council, do hereby honor and acknowledge these events and the sailors by dedicating a plaque on Ryder Street to commemorate the Port Chicago 50, whose courage hastened the integration of the Navy and the armed forces. Signed today's date, November 9th, 2019, signed by me, Bob Sampine, Mayor, and the Vallejo City Council. I'd like to present one copy to the museum and the other copy to Sharon McGriff. Look at the camera. And Sharon, before you leave, I'll get my hands to work, they're cold. This is a certificate of special recognition presented to Sharon McGriff Payne for your dedicated work researching, documenting, and advocating for the important history of African Americans in Solano County and in Vallejo, and in particular your work bringing to light the groundbreaking actions of the Port Chicago 50. Thank you for your countless hours, hard work, commitment, and dedication presented today's date. Signed by me, Bob Sampine, Mayor, I wish to present this to you. Thank you very much.
Well, so next we have our featured speaker, which is Sharon McGriff-Payne, and to give some words about your experience in the research and more of the story. If you'd like to put some, that would be great. Thank you. And I would just want to, again, thank you so much. This is happening because of you, really. I mean, there certainly was a lot of help, but without you starting the effort, it would never would have happened. So I want to thank you so much. Thank you so much.
My hands are cold. First, let me thank everyone for coming out today. I know Saturday mornings are usually busy mornings where we're all over the place, but thank you for coming out today. I am absolutely sort of overcome right now. This is a dream realized for me. So I hope I have a few notes, so I hope I can stick to them. I want to thank all of the elected officials here for coming out today. I truly appreciate your being here. It says that not only do you think history is important, our history is important, you even think the history that is not always pleasant is equally important too. And in fact, it's this history that we should learn the most from. So thank you for being here. I want to thank our mighty but tiny committee who, when I brought this up, they said, yes, we will help. I want them to, if they don't mind, would they come out, Liat, Brendan, Brian, Jim, we hooked Jim in sort of at the end, Katie. Wonderful people. Like I said, this was swirling around in my head for a while, and at one point I brought it up to them, and about 2 years ago we met, in fact, down here on the pier, and it was Brendan who has written a book on Georgia Street that helped me with some of the history that I didn't know about, and in fact it was some family history in a sense that he helped me with in terms of telling me when African-American sailors, when a large group of African-American sailors came here, I guess about 1943, 1944, yes. So I appreciate each and every one of these wonderful people here, so thank you so much. We also want to say thank you to the Public Works Department. I first talked with Terrence Davis, and it was from Terrence Davis, Mike Schreiner, and then Jose Gamez. It is Jose's beautiful work, and I'd like Jose to come here, please. It's Jose's work, and if you get a chance, come and see the beautiful plaque. He's an artist, because I would have never thought of putting all of those beautiful stones, and if you can, when you look at the plaque, please count the stones. And that has really special meaning. So that's an artist. So thank you so much. I appreciate it. So let me just say a few words. I'm not going to go into the deep history of the Port of Chicago because you can read it online. And Katie also hit the high points of what happened during 1944 and the July 17, 1944 explosion over at Port Chicago. And why we're here is because African-American sailors, the surviving African-American sailors, were brought here. And in fact, they lived in barracks. I think it was Brendan who actually pointed out that the barracks were probably located right about there. And they were segregated barracks because, again, as you know, the military was segregated during the World War II. So let me just mention why this is so important to me. My father was sailor. Why was in Vallejo in early 1940s, not me, I wasn't around yet, but he was sent here in the 1940s, shortly after the war was declared. he loaded munitions here at Mare Island. It's not lost on me for any minute, not at all, that he could have been sent to Fort Chicago, because again, many of the sailors that he served with, they actually were in boot camp together at Great Lakes Naval Training Center in Illinois. So when they were sent here, some went to Mare Island, some went to Fort Chicago. It really sort of grips me sometimes when I think he could have easily been sent to Fort Chicago, and I wouldn't be here today. So this is what this is so meaningful. This is why this is so meaningful to me. And I remember maybe about 10, 15 years ago, I had heard there was a possibility of a plaque being brought here years ago. And I remember I thought, why a plaque here? Because at that point, I did not understand that the sailors were here on Ryder Street. So again, after doing a lot of research, I found that out. But I tucked that in the back of my mind. And over the last few years, I decided, well, something really needs to be done, because in a sense, it's my generation that really has the memory, not the direct memory, because again, I wasn't here, but I remember hearing my mother and father talk about Port Chicago. One of the things is that Port Chicago was always part of my family story. I don't remember when I didn't know about Port Chicago. When I was a child, I thought only African Americans were killed at Port Chicago. I later found out that the majority were African Americans, but of course there were other races who were killed there as well. So I decided a few years ago that, this was important. And not only is it important to honor my parents and to honor those men who died and who were injured and the ones who actually stood up for their rights, but it's also important that we know this for Vallejo history. We have a beautiful history. We have a complicated history, but it's a history that needs to be told. So I want to really thank some other people while I'm here. I want to thank our NAACP of the 1940s. Those were true warriors. It's because of the NAACP that the word got out to the nation, because they utilized the black press to let them know that these young men had been charged with mutiny. So it was as a result of our NAACP that got in touch with Thurgood Marshall, who actually worked for the NAACP. So I want to really thank people like Arthur Scott, the late Arthur Scott, and another Mr. Frank Shipp, who was the president in 1943, 1944. I want to thank them so much. But most of all, I want to thank the young sailors who stood up at a time, even in the face of being told, we will put you in front of a firing squad. I want to really make it as clear as possible. These young men were mostly from the Deep South. So being threatened was not that big of a deal, even if it was by the government. So they faced down, and I can only imagine what they had to go through, because again, it was wartime. So I want to say thank you to them, and I want to thank, in fact, not just the Port Chicago 50, because in all it was 250 who actually took the brunt of the punishment, but it was 50 who was actually charged with mutiny. So I want to say thank you to them. I want to thank all of the young African American men who served during World War II at a time when they were fighting for victory overseas, and they also had to fight a war right here at home. So I want to say thank you, and I want to also really let people know, please come down and utilize this spot. Come down, have lunch, come down and reflect on our history here. I want this place to be a monument to a teachable moment in our past. So I appreciate you all being here today, so thank you.
And again, thank you so much. Thank you to Sharon. Please, Sharon McGriff-Payne. Thank you. And thank you all for coming. This is really wonderful. We weren't quite sure. This kind of came together in fits and starts. And to have so many people here is really wonderful. So don't leave. Please take a look at this beautiful monument. And the sun is shining now. Excuse me. And thank you so much for coming. Thanks again.
My name is Carlos Diaz, City of Vallejo, Public Works, Streets Department. We started this project about a month ago. It was a group of us, about 6 guys, put our differences aside, made sure everything was clear and no misunderstandings to make this monument happen. And a lot of work, a lot of overtime involved, but we wanted to make sure we did an amazing job.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.